Welcome to Shutterbugs, Photography as Art. A study of photo composition. Shutterbugs includes 10 sections of discussion, from basic exposure, depth of field, exposure priority, movement and stability, what looks good, portrait and landscape, the differences, color balance, weather effects, daylight shadow effects on lighting, and sharpness, position of light source. There are 3 basic exposure settings: the lens opening, the shutter speed, and the camera light sensitivity settings or film speed. The film speed is referred to in 2 different ways, ASA and ISO. They both have the same numbers, and in general a medium ISO of 800 is the average speed setting that is preferred. An ISO of 3200 is very fast, but it renders grainy photos. An ISO of 64 is very slow and cannot catch low light levels, but it renders high definition photos. The second lighting factor is depth of field. With the subject in the middle, the red line, the depth of field is narrow between the 2 black arrows. The camera is on the left and the distance from the camera is to the right. With a small aperture of f/22, you will notice that the blue lines, the blue arrows, show a depth of field in focus from right in front of the camera out to infinity, or as far as the camera can see. Closed and open apertures. Narrow depth of field on the left. The subject is in focus, but the trees behind him is out of focus. And on the right, we have a scene where the f-stop is shut down to, say, maybe f/22. A very small lens opening yields a high depth of field from anywhere from in front of the camera out to as far as the camera can see. Everything is in focus in this picture. Shutter speeds and aperture priority. We've discussed aperture, and generally speaking, it is known that if you have a small lens opening, you need a slower shutter speed so that more light can come to the film. Conversely, if the lens is all the way open, you are able to use higher shutter speeds because the lens is letting in more light, and the high shutter speed does not conflict with letting enough light in. You will notice that in some pictures, like in football and soccer, that the subject is in focus, everything behind him is out of focus, everything in front of him is out of focus, or her. And the reason for that is the shutter speed captures the action, the fast pass, but the lens has to be all the way open to let in enough light at that high shutter speed to make a good exposure. We'll discuss this further. Shutter speeds. Fast shutter speed on the left captures the spray in midair. To the right, a slow shutter speed gives a blurred movement and shows the flow of the water as a curtain rather than sharp droplets of water. Either effect is up to you, whatever looks good. To make your picture, you can use the shutter speed to achieve this. Digital camera lens characteristics. Generally speaking, a small millimeter lens like 17 on the left will give you a wide angle shot. Fisheye lenses are totally wide angle, about 180 degrees, and require very varied shutter speeds that are are allowed to be quickly done at maybe 1,000th of a second because of the wide 1.2 opening that they normally have. In the center is the 24 millimeter lens. It gives a normal, undistorted 1:1 ratio of picture to film image. Generally speaking, anything below 1/60th of a second shutter speed for this lens would be in need of a tripod. And in a 50 millimeter lens, anything over 24 is considered to be a telephoto lens. And a telephoto lens, generally speaking, has a small angle of view. And for handheld photography, 500th of a second shutter speed is preferred. At slower shutter speeds, tripod is always recommended. Here we have a wide angle lens. It gives the effect of peripheral view closest to what we normally see with our eyes. This would be a normal lens, a 50 millimeter lens, and the ratio is 1:1. Everything in the picture is undistorted, and it's close to being a portrait lens. Telephoto lens has a narrow angle of view and generally speaking has a slow lens in that it takes its small aperture because of the manufacture of the lens to achieve the telephoto. It has a smaller f-stop, maximum f-stop. That is why in most telephoto shots with a small lens opening of the maximum aperture requires the slowest shutter speed possible. The depth of field is narrow. Lens speed. An f1.4 lens is termed a fast lens. An f1.2 is faster, and an f1.2 has a larger light gathering ability than an f2.8 lens when it is fully open. Faster lenses are generally more expensive to produce. A trick of the eye. What line is longer? Line A or line B? Take a good look. Be careful. The answer is that both lines are equal. The reason why line A is normally, generally speaking, appears to be a longer line is because when we look at a vertical line, we see depth of field, because we look from in front of ourselves off to the distance, which is more space than a horizontal view of the same length. Adding depth to a scene can be achieved as shown in the two portraits below. Each portrait has the same dimensions, but the matting on the portrait is different, you will notice. The wider mat on the right, below the photo, adds depth because the vertical line is longer on the bottom part of the mat than on the picture on the left. You can almost see that you can walk into the picture on the right, whereas you cannot as much so do that with the portrait on the left. Horizontal, vertical, and slanted lines. Vertical lines and horizontal lines yield stability to the arrangement of the photo. Slanted lines in general mean movement and create imbalance or instability. Horizontal versus slanted. Examples. The bird on the left photo is at an angle. Definitely we are talking here about movement and unbalance. Whereas the horizontal boat and the piers on the picture on the right create stability and a sedentary effect. Composition, or what looks good. When looking at a picture, we can divide it up with vertical and horizontal lines into grids. In the first place, dividing photo space into portions. Generally speaking, anything over thirds or fourths at the most would be something that would be confusing to the simplicity the mind seeks in looking at a picture. But halves and thirds and fourths quadrants of the picture can lead to arrangements that the content of the picture can be encased in and present a simpler view for the mind to associate and to appreciate. points of focus create multi-sided figures. 3 points of focus comprise a triangle. 4 points of focus comprise a rectangle or a square. That rectangle can be at an angle to create movement, or it can be horizontal and vertical, creating stability and rest. These create interest for the eye when the analysis is done to compose the photograph. Repeating shapes and adding visual rhythm can be achieved in the following pictures. On the right, specifically, we have common shapes, but we have random patterns. On the left, we have vertical symmetry in halves. Pleasing effects, partitioning, and patterns. On the picture on the left, we have divided the subject into 3 parts. 2/3 from the top is the water line, and the last third of the picture is the water itself, the pond, the inlet. And we call this a vertical 2/3 and 1/3 composition. Shapes and patterns create rhythm. The picture on the right has rectangles in it that repeat at their varying sizes as they go off to the left. They are at an angle which creates movement. They are squares made of horizontal and vertical lines which create stability, and this creates interest to have the contrast of the two in one photo. Portrait and landscape. Landscape photo was one whose borders make a rectangle wider than it is high, and the landscape mode is familiar to what our eyes see in generality. Portrait mode is called portrait mode because mostly portraits are taken of people that are vertical because of the content of the subject matter. People are vertical, not horizontal. And, of course, in portrait mode, it's just the opposite, that the vertical is larger than the horizontal dimension. Magazines use portrait photos on their cover pages, as most magazines are portrait dimensions. Color balance. The primary colors are red, blue, and green, and all together add to create white light. You're familiar with the prism in the high school class, where the prism divided white light into various colors. Red in small amounts goes a long way. It is appealing to us because it is flesh or skin color. And blue makes for a whiter look to the picture, and it is a cool color. Red is warm. Green is for pastoral scenes. Yellow creates sharp focus and warmth. And white balance, when the photo is color correct, white is the combination of red, blue, and green, and the white is white in a picture when the color balance is correct. The color red in art. Notice the small bit of red in the picture on the left. The hat, the front of the truck, the taillights. There's not a lot of red in the picture, but it really hits home and has great emphasis in the picture. The picture on the right has a lot of red, and a lot of red is given to strong emotion. On top of the picture being in sharp focus and being very graphic, with horizontal and vertical lines, you would say it was a very strong picture. Blue on the left adds to the whiteness of a picture and infers coolness. Definitely this is a picture of winter snow. It is cool. Chilling, bone chilling. Green is for foliage and pastoral scenes. And the green is vivid in that photo on the right. Weather effects. Cool and dry. Photos are sharp and crisp. Little haze and distance of photo scenery. And warm and moist, the opposite, leaves for softer edges, fog results, heat waves distort hard edges on photos, and soften horizontal and vertical edges. Temperature and moisture. Warm and muggy on the left, hazy, out of focus. Cold and crisp. The air is very cold. It's a winter scene. The lines are sharp. Everything is in focus. And those are the two major differences in humidity and temperature. Daylight shadow effects. Sunrise and evening always give a third-dimensional look to the picture because of long shadows and the saturated colors due to little reflection off surfaces. Noon, there are no shadows, little depth of field if any, flat, and generally speaking not as vivid because of the reflections of the hard light. Here we see some examples. Sunrise, we have long shadows. We have saturated colors. Midday, we have short shadows, flat, depth of field, good for shooting buildings. The position of a single light source. If the camera is to the left where the X is, and the subject matter is the cartoon figure, we will notice that when the angles of the light source are at 45 degrees to the subject, it creates a 3D effect. For a flat effect, you would want front lighting, which gives no shadow. Finally, with the light source behind the subject in the photograph, we call that a silhouette, as the light is bright and the shadow is the front of the camera object or subject. Here are some examples. Sunlight subject front and rear. Front light, flat, noontime, not too much shadow. An example on the right is a silhouette where the light is the Niagara Falls and the trees that bracket the picture and frame it, and the persons in the picture to the right are in the shadow because the falls is backlighting the scene. Can you identify the photo composition techniques in the following pictures? What is interesting to your eye? What do you see from what you've learned that makes the photos interesting and desirable? Here we have a common shape, a circle. We have a lot of eyes, which are random patterns. So we have the contrast of having something that is very well defined, a circle, and then a random pattern. Here we have a picture of the Maid of the Mist boat in the Niagara Falls waters. And what do we see here? The rock formation at the base of the falls forms a triangle. The boat is at an angle which shows movement. In this photo, we have a 2/3 and 1/3 arrangement, whereas the foreground is the bottom third and the sky is the top 2/3. We have horizontal line for stability, and we have the angles of the vanishing line of the road converging at the horizon, creating movement. Contrast again, interesting to the eye, the mind's eye. What do we see here? Are there shapes? Are there focus points? The large vertical tree on the left is definitely a focus point. And the water is creating a triangle. The yellow flowers are a random pattern. and the arrangement of rows of other weeds create a angle for movement, whereas the body of water is known to be stable because we see the horizon line at the top, a horizontal line. Again, in composition, we have one balancing the other effect. What do we have here in this picture? We have a repeated pattern of bricks. We have a repeated pattern of vertical flowers, horizontal bricks. The horizontal and the vertical create the composition that we would find interesting to see. In this photo, there is horizontal, horizon line, the ground, vertical, the trees and the men, and to complement or offset the horizontal and vertical stability, we have the red line. Notice it's a red line for emphasis of the dog leash at an angle. Another thing to notice is that the head of the dog and the bodies of the two gentlemen in the photo form 3 points with their feet that create a triangle. And in a triangle we have horizontal, vertical, and the hypotenuse is always at an angle for movement. What do we have here? We have focus and out of focus. Just simple wide open lens creating small depth of field imparts a contrast right off the bat without any composition as far as focal points, squares, thirds, random patterns, and so forth that we have discussed. Here we have vertical trees, the horizon line, and the angled runner showing movement definitely, and stability offsetting each other and becoming again interesting and pleasing to the eye. What do you see in this picture? What about the horizontal and vertical lines creating stability in the window, which is a primary focal point, and the angled attitude of the horse creating movement? What about the diffused light coming in the window versus the in focus light? Everything is in focus, sharp lines inside the room. Again, we are talking about balance and composition. We hope you have enjoyed this Shutterbugs photography as art. If you have any comments, please email us at fantasticphotoart@roadrunner.com. We'd be glad to answer any questions, and we'd love to hear from you. Go out and have fun shooting, enjoy what you do, and remember a few of the techniques. In the final analysis, it's what you see in the shutter that's going to make your photo the best photo you've ever seen.